The morning light crept slowly through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William stood before his mirror adjusting the golden buttons on his ceremonial uniform. His fingers trembled slightly, not from nervousness but from the overwhelming weight of what this day meant. Today his father would become King Charles III and William would witness the most important ceremony in British history alongside his beloved wife Kate and their 3 precious children. Kate moved gracefully around their bedroom, putting the finishing touches on her elegant royal blue ensemble. The dress had been chosen months ago after careful consideration by royal stylists, but Kate had insisted on adding her own personal touches. A delicate sapphire brooch that belonged to Princess Diana sparkled on her lapel, catching the morning sunlight. She paused to look at William and saw the mixture of pride and emotion written across his face. Down the hallway, their 3 children were getting ready with the help of their nannies. 10-year-old Prince George stood perfectly still as his jacket was brushed one final time. He understood more than his younger siblings about what was happening today. He had been told many times that his grandfather would receive a special crown, and that someday far in the future he might wear that same crown. The thought both excited and frightened him in ways he could not yet understand. Princess Charlotte, at 8 years old, was fascinated by her beautiful dress and the way it swished. When she walked, she had practiced her curtsy dozens of times and was determined to be perfect today. Her long hair had been styled in elegant curls that cascaded down her back, and she wore a small tiara that had been specially made for this occasion. She felt like a real princess from the fairy tales her mother read to her each night. 5-year-old Prince Louis was the most excited of all, though he did not fully grasp why today was so special. He loved getting dressed up in fancy clothes, and he especially loved riding in the big cars with flags on them. His nanny had explained that today he would see lots of important people and that he must be on his very best behavior. Louis nodded. Seriously though, inside he was bubbling with excitement about the adventure that lay ahead. The breakfast table at Kensington Palace was unusually quiet that morning. Usually the children chatted excitedly about their plans for the day. But today everyone seemed to understand that something very important was happening. William tried to eat but found his appetite had disappeared. He kept thinking about his grandmother Queen Elizabeth and how she would have loved to see this day. Kate noticed his distant expression and reached over to squeeze his hand gently. The children ate their breakfast more carefully than usual, trying not to spill anything on their special clothes. George helped Louis cut his toast, while Charlotte reminded her little brother to use his napkin. Kate watched her children with pride, seeing how they were already learning to take care of each other and behave with the dignity expected of young royals. Outside Kensington Palace, the security preparations had been going on since before dawn. Police officers lined the streets and snipers were positioned on rooftops. The route to Westminster Abbey had been checked and double-checked. Every person who would come near the royal family had been thoroughly investigated. The level of security was unlike anything London had seen in decades. Royal protection officers briefed William and Kate one final time about the schedule and security arrangements. They would travel by car rather than carriage due to security concerns, but the route had been planned to give the public maximum opportunity to see the royal family. Thousands of people were already lining the streets hoping to catch a glimpse of the future king and his family on this historic day. The phone calls started early in the morning. Family members from around the world called to wish them well and express their excitement about the ceremony. William spoke briefly with his brother Prince Harry, who was calling from California. Despite their differences, both brothers understood the importance of this day for their father and for the monarchy itself. Kate spent time reviewing the order of service with the children, making sure they understood when to stand, sit, and participate in the responses. She had created a simple diagram showing where they would sit in Westminster Abbey and what they could expect to see. George studied it carefully while Charlotte asked dozens of questions about who else would be there and what they would be wearing. The morning news programs were already broadcasting live from outside Westminster Abbey, showing the crowds gathering and the final preparations being made inside the ancient building. William watched for a few minutes and was amazed by the number of people who had come to London for this event. People from all over the world had traveled to witness his father become king. As the time approached to leave Kensington Palace, William gathered his family in their private sitting room for a moment of quiet reflection. He looked at Kate, beautiful and composed as always, ready to support him through whatever lay ahead. He looked at George, growing taller and more serious each day, beginning to understand his future role. He looked at Charlotte, full of grace and intelligence, already showing signs of the strong woman she would become. And he looked at Louis, still so young and innocent, bringing joy and laughter to their family every day. Kate helped the children with their final preparations, making sure George had his ceremonial medal pinned correctly and that Charlotte's gloves were properly fitted. Louis needed help with his white gloves, which seemed determined to slip off his small hands. Each child received a final inspection and words of encouragement from both parents. The drive from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey would take them through the heart of London, where millions of people were waiting to see them pass. William took a deep breath, knowing that once they left the privacy of their home, they would be in the public eye for the rest of the day. Every gesture, every expression, every moment would be captured by cameras and watched by people around the world. Kate gathered the children around her one more time, reminding them of how proud she was of them and how important they were to the royal family and to the country. She told them that their great-grandmother Queen Elizabeth was watching over them and would be proud to see how grown up and responsible they had become. The final moments at Kensington Palace were filled with last-minute preparations and quiet conversations. William spoke privately with his private secretary about the schedule while Kate made sure the children had everything they needed. The nannies and staff members who were staying behind lined up to wish the family well and express their excitement about watching the ceremony on television. As they prepared to leave for Westminster Abbey, William felt the full weight of history settling on his shoulders. This was not just his father's day, but a day that would change the monarchy forever. He was about to witness the beginning of a new reign, and his own journey toward eventually becoming king himself had taken another significant step. The black Bentley waited outside Kensington Palace with its engine running quietly and its royal standard flying proudly from the front. The car had been polished until it gleamed like a mirror, and the interior had been prepared with bottled water and tissues for the children. William opened the door for Kate, who gathered her dress carefully as she slid into the leather seat. The children followed, with George taking his place next to his father while Charlotte and Louis sat beside their mother. As their car pulled away from Kensington Palace, William looked back at their home one final time. When they returned this evening, everything would be different. His father would be king, and William would be one step closer to his own destiny. The palace gates opened slowly, and suddenly, they were surrounded by the roar of crowds who had been waiting since dawn to see them pass. The streets of London had been transformed overnight into a festival of red, white, and blue. Union Jack flags hung from every window and lamppost, while banners welcoming the new king stretched across the roads. People pressed against the barriers, waving frantically as the royal car approached. Many had brought cameras and phones to capture this historic moment, while others simply wanted to be part of the celebration. Inside the car, Kate pointed out interesting sights to the children as they drove through the crowded streets. She showed them the elaborate decorations and the people in their finest clothes who had come from all over the world. Charlotte pressed her face to the window, amazed by the sea of faces and the incredible energy of the crowd. Louis bounced excitedly in his seat, waving at everyone he could see. George sat quietly beside his father, watching the crowds with serious eyes. He was beginning to understand that all these people had come to see his family, and that someday they too would look to him in the same way. The responsibility felt enormous for someone so young, but William had been teaching him that service to others was the most important part of being royal. The police motorcycles ahead of their car moved smoothly through the streets, creating a clear path through the crowds. Officers on foot saluted as the royal car passed, while mounted police sat proudly on their horses. The level of organization was incredible, with every detail planned months in advance to ensure the safety of the royal family and the thousands of spectators. As they drove through central London, the children could see people hanging out of windows and standing on balconies trying to get a better view. Office workers had abandoned their desks to join the celebration, while shop owners stood in their doorways waving flags. The entire city seemed to have stopped its normal routine to focus on this extraordinary day. Kate noticed that William was unusually quiet during the drive, and she could see the emotion building in his eyes. This was not just a ceremonial day for him, but a deeply personal moment when his father would fulfill a destiny that had been planned since birth. She reached over and took his hand, offering silent support as they made their way through the celebrating crowds. The drive gave them time to prepare mentally for what lay ahead at Westminster Abbey. William reviewed the order of service in his mind, while Kate quietly reminded the children about their behavior during the ceremony. She had spent weeks preparing them for this moment, explaining the importance of sitting still and participating respectfully in the ancient rituals. Along the route, they passed landmarks that held special meaning for the royal family. They drove past Buckingham Palace, where crowds had gathered around the gates hoping to catch a glimpse of other members of the royal family. The palace looked magnificent, with its flags flying and its guards standing at attention in their red uniforms and tall black hats. The children were fascinated by the different uniforms they could see from their car window. Military officers in dress uniforms walked alongside police officers in ceremonial gear, while members of various royal households wore their distinctive livery. Charlotte asked her mother about the different colors and symbols, while Louis tried to count all the horses he could see. As they approached Westminster, the crowds became even thicker and more enthusiastic. People had traveled from Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland to be part of this historic day. International visitors mixed with local families, creating a truly global celebration of the British monarchy. Signs and banners in different languages showed the worldwide interest in the coronation ceremony. The car slowed as they entered the area immediately around Westminster Abbey, and the children could see the magnificent building rising before them. The ancient stone walls looked golden in the morning sunlight, while the tower seemed to reach up toward heaven itself. Scaffolding and cameras were positioned at strategic points to capture every moment of the ceremony for television audiences around the world. Security was incredibly tight in this final stretch of their journey. Armed police stood at every corner while plainclothes officers moved through the crowds watching for any sign of trouble. The car was escorted by motorcycle outriders who communicated constantly with their headquarters to ensure everything remained safe and secure. Inside the car, William felt his heart beating faster as Westminster Abbey grew larger before them. He had attended many services in this sacred building, but never one as important as today. This was where kings and queens had been crowned for nearly 1,000 years, and where he himself would one day undergo the same ancient ceremony. Kate checked the children one final time, making sure their clothes were perfect and their behavior was appropriate for the solemn ceremony ahead. She straightened George's tie and smoothed Charlotte's hair while reminding Louis to stay close to her once they were inside the abbey. Each child nodded seriously, understanding that their parents were counting on them to represent the family. With dignity, the noise from the crowds was becoming louder as more people realized the royal car was approaching. Cheers and applause echoed off the buildings, while church bells rang out across London announcing the arrival of the royal family. The excitement was infectious, and even William found himself smiling and waving at the enthusiastic spectators as their car made the final turn toward Westminster Abbey. William could see other members of the royal family arriving in their own vehicles. His aunts and uncles were already there, along with cousins and other relatives who had come to support his father on this momentous day. The sight of his extended family gathering together filled him with warmth and pride. The car finally came to a stop outside the west entrance of Westminster Abbey, and William could see the red carpet that had been laid out for their arrival. Photographers and television cameras were positioned behind barriers ready to capture their entrance into the historic building. The moment had arrived when they would step out of their private world and into the public ceremony that would crown his father as king. Kate took a deep breath and squeezed William's hand one final time before they prepared to exit the car. The children sat up straighter in their seats, ready to face the cameras and crowds that awaited them. In just a few moments, they would walk through the doors of Westminster Abbey and take their places in one of the most important ceremonies in British history. The car door opened and William stepped out first onto the red carpet that stretched from their vehicle to the magnificent entrance of Westminster Abbey. The sound hit him immediately, like a wave of pure energy, as thousands of voices cheered and cameras clicked rapidly from every direction. He turned to help Kate, who emerged gracefully from the car holding her dress, carefully to avoid any mishaps on this most important of days. George followed his parents with a serious expression. He had been practicing for weeks. Even at his young age, he understood that millions of people around the world were watching this moment, and that he represented not just his family but the future of the monarchy itself. His small hand reached for his father's as they stood together on the red carpet looking up at the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey. Charlotte stepped out next, and immediately her face lit up with wonder at the incredible scene before her. The abbey looked like something from a fairy tale, with its soaring towers and intricate stone carvings. Flowers decorated every surface, creating a garden of color against the gray stone walls. She had seen pictures of Westminster Abbey many times, but standing before it in person was completely different and far more magical than she had imagined. Little Louis was the last to emerge from the car, and his eyes went wide as he took in the spectacle surrounding them. The noise was incredible, with cheers from the crowd, mixing with the sound of military bands and church bells ringing across London. He stayed close to his mother as photographers called out their names and officials in elaborate uniforms bowed respectfully to the royal family. The entrance to Westminster Abbey was framed by massive wooden doors that had been opened wide to welcome the distinguished guests. 2 lines of guards in ceremonial dress stood at attention, creating a pathway for the royal family to walk through. Their uniforms were immaculate, with gold braiding and polished buttons that caught the morning light like tiny mirrors. As they walked toward the entrance, William could feel the weight of history pressing down on him from the ancient stones above. This building had witnessed the coronations of kings and queens for nearly 1,000 years, and today his father would join that long line of monarchs. Every step he took was following in the footsteps of his ancestors who had walked this same path centuries before. Kate held Charlotte and Louis close to her as they moved slowly up the steps to the Abbey entrance. She could see other members of the royal family arriving and taking their places in the procession that would enter the sacred building together. Her sister Pippa waved from the crowd of distinguished guests, while her parents stood nearby, beaming with pride at their daughter and grandchildren. The interior of Westminster Abbey took their breath away as they stepped through the ancient doorway. Centuries of history seemed to whisper from every stone, while magnificent stained glass windows painted colorful patterns across the floor. The ceiling soared high above them, supported by graceful arches that had stood strong for hundreds of years. Candles flickered everywhere, creating a warm glow that mixed with the natural light streaming through the windows. Flowers filled every available space, creating the most incredible display any of them had ever seen. White roses mixed with purple orchids, while golden lilies added touches of royal color throughout the sacred space. The fragrance was overwhelming in the most beautiful way possible, filling the ancient building with the sweet scent of celebration and new beginnings. The organ music was already playing when they entered, sending deep, rich notes echoing off the stone walls and up into the vaulted ceiling. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, wrapping around them like a musical embrace. Charlotte grabbed her mother's hand tightly as the power of the music washed over her, making her feel small but also part of something much larger than herself. Distinguished guests from around the world filled the wooden pews that had been arranged throughout the nave of the abbey. Kings and queens from other countries sat alongside presidents and prime ministers, while religious leaders from many faiths had come to witness this historic ceremony. The conversations created a gentle hum that mixed with the organ music and the rustling of formal clothes. William recognized many faces as they walked down the aisle toward their designated seats near the front of the abbey. Foreign dignitaries who had visited Buckingham Palace were there, along with British politicians and military leaders. The guest list represented the most powerful and influential people from around the globe, all gathered to witness his father become king. The children walked carefully behind their parents, trying to take in everything they were seeing while also remembering to behave with the dignity expected of young royals. George nodded politely to people he recognized, while Charlotte smiled shyly at the ladies in their beautiful dresses and elaborate hats. Louis stayed close to Kate, occasionally tugging on her dress when something particularly interesting caught his attention. Their seats were in the front section of the abbey, where they would have a perfect view of the altar and the coronation chair. William helped Kate settle the children while making sure they each had the order of service booklet that would help them follow along with the ceremony. The ancient wooden pews had been cushioned for comfort during the long service that lay ahead. As more guests continued to arrive, the abbey filled with an energy that was both reverent and exciting. This was clearly a once-in-a-lifetime event that none of the people present would ever forget. The combination of ancient tradition and modern ceremony created an atmosphere unlike anything any of them had experienced before. William looked around at his extended family members who were taking their places in nearby pews. His aunts and uncles had dressed in their finest clothes, while his cousins seemed just as amazed as his own children by the incredible spectacle unfolding around them. The royal family was gathering together in a way that happened only for the most important occasions. Kate helped the children understand what they were seeing by quietly pointing out important features of the abbey and explaining some of the traditions they would witness during the ceremony. She showed them the beautiful altar where the most sacred parts of the coronation would take place, and the special chair where kings and queens had been crowned for centuries. The photographers and television cameras were positioned at strategic points throughout the abbey to capture every moment of the historic ceremony. William knew that billions of people around the world would be watching, and that this day would be remembered and studied for generations to come. The responsibility of representing the monarchy with dignity felt heavier than ever. As they settled into their seats, William felt a mixture of pride and nervousness about what lay ahead. This was his father's day, but it was also a glimpse into his own future when he would one day sit in that same coronation chair and receive the crown himself. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying in ways he had never experienced before. The final guests were being seated, and the abbey was nearly full when William realized that the ceremony would begin soon. His father would arrive shortly, and the ancient rituals that would make him king would commence. William took Kate's hand and squeezed it gently, knowing that they were about to witness one of the most important moments in British history together as a family. The great doors of Westminster Abbey swung open with a sound that echoed through the ancient building as King Charles entered for his coronation ceremony. Every person in the abbey rose to their feet as one, creating a rustling wave of movement that swept from the back to the front of the sacred space. William felt his breath catch in his throat as he watched his father begin the slow procession down the aisle toward the altar where he would be crowned. Charles walked with dignity and grace, wearing the crimson velvet robe of state that flowed behind him like a river of royal red. The golden embroidery caught the light from the candles and stained glass windows, creating patterns that seemed to dance across the fabric. His face showed a mixture of solemnity and quiet joy as he acknowledged the distinguished guests who had come from around the world to witness this historic moment. Kate squeezed William's arm gently as emotion overwhelmed him, watching his father fulfill the destiny that had been planned since the day he was born. This was the man who had taught William about duty and service, who had prepared him for his own future role as king, and who had shown him how to balance the weight of royal responsibility with genuine care for people. Seeing Charles finally receive the crown felt like watching a lifetime of preparation come to its perfect conclusion. The children watched in fascination as their grandfather processed slowly down the aisle, followed by a long line of officials carrying the symbols of monarchy. The crown jewels sparkled like captured starlight as they were carried on velvet cushions toward the altar. Charlotte whispered to her mother, asking about the different crowns and scepters, while Louis tried to count all the people in the procession. George, that stood perfectly straight beside his father, understanding better than his younger siblings that he was witnessing something that would shape the rest of his life. Someday he would walk down this same aisle toward this same altar to receive these same symbols of kingship. The thought was both exciting and overwhelming for someone so young, but William had been teaching him that their family served something much larger than themselves. The Archbishop of Canterbury waited at the altar, dressed in magnificent white and gold robes that had been specially made for this ceremony. His face showed the gravity of the moment as he prepared to perform rituals that connected this coronation to every other coronation that had taken place in Westminster Abbey for nearly 1,000 years. The ancient words he would speak had been passed down through generations of churchmen. As Charles approached the altar, the organ music swelled, filling every corner of the abbey with rich, harmonious sound. The choir began to sing in voices so pure and beautiful that many guests felt tears coming to their eyes. The combination of music, architecture, and ceremony created an atmosphere that felt both earthly and heavenly at the same time. William watched as his father took his place before the altar and began to participate in the ancient rituals that would transform him from prince to king. Each movement, each word, each gesture had been practiced countless times, but now they carried real meaning and real power. The weight of 1,000 years of monarchy seemed to settle on Charles' shoulders as he prepared to accept the crown. The ceremony proceeded with careful precision, as each element was performed exactly as it had been for centuries. Religious leaders offered prayers while government officials presented the symbols of royal authority. Charles responded to each part of the service with dignity and reverence, showing his deep understanding of what it meant to become king. Kate helped the children follow along in their service booklets, pointing out important moments and quietly explaining what was happening. She wanted them to understand that they were witnessing history being made and that this day would be remembered long after they were gone. Charlotte asked why her grandfather looked so serious, while Louis wondered if the crown was heavy. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived as the Archbishop lifted the magnificent St. Edward's crown above Charles' head. The abbey fell into complete silence as 2,000 people held their breath waiting for the crown to be placed. William felt his heart pounding as he watched his father prepare to receive the symbol that would make him King of England and the Commonwealth realms. When the crown finally touched Charles' head, the abbey erupted in celebration. 2,000 voices joined together in singing God Save the King, while church bells rang out across London announcing the new monarch to the world. William sang with tears streaming down his face as he watched his father officially become King Charles III. The children sang along with their parents, their young voices joining the ancient anthem that had welcomed new monarchs for generations. George sang with particular pride, knowing that these same words would one day be sung for him, while Charlotte and Louis simply enjoyed being part of such a magnificent celebration. The sound filled the abbey and seemed to lift everyone present towards something greater than themselves. After the crowning ceremony continued with the presentation of other royal regalia, including the orb and scepter that symbolized the king's earthly and spiritual authority. Charles received each item with solemnity, understanding that they represented not just power but responsibility to serve his people with wisdom and compassion. William watched proudly as his father demonstrated the dignity and grace that would define his reign. The congregation began to offer their allegiance to the new king, starting with the Archbishop and continuing through the ranks of nobles and government officials. Each person spoke the ancient words of loyalty that bound them to serve the crown and support the new monarch in his duties. The ceremony connected the present moment to centuries of British tradition and constitutional monarchy. William knew that his own role in the monarchy had changed forever the moment the crown touched his father's head. He was now heir to a reigning king rather than a future king, and his path toward the throne had become one step shorter. The responsibility felt heavier but also more real as he watched his father begin his reign. Kate observed the ceremony with wonder at the beauty of the ancient rituals and the power of the moment they were witnessing together. She had married into the royal family knowing this day would come, but experiencing it in person was far more moving than she had expected. The combination of pageantry, tradition, and genuine emotion created something truly magical as the ceremony moved toward its conclusion. Charles received the final blessings and prayers that would send him forth as the newly crowned king. The Archbishop spoke words of wisdom and guidance, while the congregation joined in prayers for the new reign. The sacred nature of the moment was evident in every face and every voice raised in celebration. The organ music reached its crescendo as the ceremony officially ended and King Charles prepared to leave Westminster Abbey as the crowned monarch. William felt a mixture of pride, joy, and anticipation, knowing that his father's reign had begun, and that their family's service to the nation would continue into a new generation. The coronation had been everything he had hoped for and more, creating memories that would last forever. The newly crowned King Charles turned to face the congregation of Westminster Abbey for the first time as monarch, and William felt his heart swell with pride and emotion. His father stood tall and dignified, wearing the heavy St. Edward's crown that caught the light from hundreds of candles flickering throughout the ancient building. The moment felt surreal as William realized that everything had changed in those few sacred minutes. When the crown was placed upon his father's head, Kate reached for William's hand as they prepared to follow the new king in the procession that would take them back down the aisle and out into the world where Charles would begin his reign. The children stood quietly beside their parents, understanding that something momentous had just occurred, even if they could not fully grasp the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The weight of history seemed to hang in the air around them. King Charles began his slow walk back down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, now carrying himself with the authority and dignity of a crowned monarch. The heavy coronation robes flowed behind him while the crown jewels sparkled in his hands and on his head. Every step he took was measured and purposeful as he acknowledged the guests who had witnessed his transformation from prince to king. The organ music filled the abbey with triumphant sounds that seemed to lift everyone present toward something greater than themselves. The choir sang with voices so pure and powerful that the ancient stones seemed to vibrate with the melody. William felt goosebumps on his arms as the music washed over him, mixing with his emotions about what he had just witnessed. As they joined the procession leaving the abbey, William looked around at the incredible scene one final time. The stained glass windows painted colorful patterns across the stone floor, while flowers filled every available space with their sweet fragrance. Candles flickered in tall stands, creating pools of warm light that danced across the faces of the departing guests. This sacred space had witnessed something truly extraordinary. George walked carefully beside his father, trying to match his dignified pace while taking in every detail of what was happening around them. He understood that he had just watched his grandfather become king, and that someday he might stand in this same place receiving the same crown. The responsibility felt enormous but also exciting as he imagined his own future role in the monarchy. Charlotte held her mother's hand tightly as they moved through the abbey toward the exit. Her eyes were wide with wonder at everything she had seen and heard during the ceremony. The beautiful music, the magnificent decorations, and the serious faces of all the important people had created an experience unlike anything she had ever imagined. She felt proud to be part of such an important family. Little Louis stayed close to Kate as they walked through the crowd of distinguished guests. He had been on his best behavior throughout the long ceremony, and now he was excited to get outside where he could see more of the celebration that was happening throughout London. The sounds of cheering crowds could already be heard through the thick walls of Westminster Abbey. The exit from Westminster Abbey revealed a transformed London where millions of people had gathered to celebrate their new king. The roar of the crowd was deafening as they caught sight of the royal family emerging from the ancient building. Union Jack flags waved everywhere while people cheered and sang, creating an atmosphere of pure joy and celebration that stretched as far as the eye could see. William helped Kate navigate the steps outside the abbey while keeping a protective eye on the children, who were amazed by the incredible scene before them. The crowds stretched in every direction, with people hanging out of windows and standing on rooftops trying to get a better view of the newly crowned king and his family. The energy was infectious, and even William found himself smiling and waving at the enthusiastic spectators. King Charles paused at the top of the abbey steps to acknowledge the massive crowds that had gathered to welcome him as their new monarch. He raised his hand in a gentle wave while the people responded with even louder cheers and applause. The moment marked the beginning of his public role as king, and William could see the transformation in his father's bearing and confidence. The journey back to Buckingham Palace would take them through streets lined with millions of people that had come from around the world to witness this historic day. The royal cars waited to transport the family through London, while police motorcycles and mounted officers prepared to escort them safely through the celebrating crowds. Every detail had been planned months in advance to ensure their security and the public's safety. As they settled into their car for the drive back to Buckingham Palace, the children pressed their faces to the windows, eager to see more of the incredible celebration happening throughout the city. Charlotte pointed out the decorations hanging from buildings while Louis tried to count all the flags he could see. George sat quietly beside his father, processing everything he had witnessed during the coronation ceremony. The drive through London revealed a city completely transformed by celebration and joy. Every street was lined with people waving flags and cheering while bands played music and children threw flower petals into the air. Shop owners had decorated their windows with royal portraits, while restaurants offered special coronation menus to mark the historic occasion. William watched the crowds through his window and felt overwhelmed by the love and support being shown for his father and their family. These people had waited hours in the cold to catch a glimpse of their new king, and the genuine emotion on their faces was deeply moving. He realized that the monarchy meant something special to millions of people around the world. Kate helped the children wave to the crowds while pointing out interesting sights along their route back to Buckingham Palace. She explained how people had traveled from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and many other countries just to be part of this celebration. The international flags scattered throughout the crowd showed how far people had come to witness the coronation. The arrival at Buckingham Palace marked the end of the formal ceremony, but the beginning of King Charles' reign as monarch. The palace had been decorated with thousands of flowers while staff members lined up to welcome their new sovereign home. The famous balcony where the royal family would appear for the traditional balcony moment had been prepared for the crowds gathered in the palace courtyard. As they entered Buckingham Palace, William felt the full weight of what had changed that day. His father was now king, and William himself was now heir to a reigning monarch rather than a future king. The path toward his own coronation had become one step shorter, and the responsibility felt both exciting and overwhelming. The family gathered in the palace while preparations were made for their appearance on the famous balcony, where they would greet the crowds one final time. King Charles had changed out of his heavy coronation robes into a military uniform, while the crown jewels were carefully returned to their secure location in the Tower of London. Standing together on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, the royal family waved to the massive crowd that had gathered below. The sight was incredible, with thousands of people stretching as far as they could see, all celebrating the beginning of a new reign. William held his children close, knowing that this moment would stay with them forever as the day they watched their grandfather become king and their family's destiny moved forward into a new chapter of service to the nation.